As we begin today, and we talked about the brief overview and historical perspective, understanding the past can really help us in our current work. And with that being said, I just want to jump right in. We have Maritza here. She's a bilingual clinical specialist from the Addiction Services Council in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I want to start off by having Maritza talk to us about the term acculturation, right? So as we talk about and think about the fact that, wow, our nation is really diverse now. 4 out of 10 people are identifying, right, with an ethnicity other than white. Talk to us, Maritza, about acculturation. Like, what does it mean? And, why is it even relevant to the work that we do today?
Sure, Dr. Thomas, thank you. It's really exciting to be in this presentation and have a voice for the population that I serve. As you could see, acculturation is an assimilation of different cultures, right? Typically, the domain culture takes a big part in that assimilation. Acculturation is the transfer of values and customs from one group to another. And this could impact the clients that we're receiving in our offices and the clients that we're serving, because it is important to understand their values, how they see the world, what are some of the traumas that they came from, what are some of their beliefs, and respect that, right? We all have our own uniqueness, our own ways of that, our own values. And sometimes that is overlooked. And especially when you come from another country, coming to the United States, for example, and not understanding the language, not understanding, the food, the music, the holidays. And this could be traumatizing to a lot, because then you'll start seeing isolation and depression. So it's important to understand that someone's culture, a lot of times when they come to the United States, they feel that they have to, forget about their values and forget about, speak English and not speak Spanish any longer. This causes a problem, because then you lose your identity. Is a loss of identity of who you really are, where your roots are from. So, and the video that we're about to watch, it explains a little bit about exactly who we are, the Hispanic Latino culture is, and how the youth today are struggling, not fitting in a particular box. So this video that you're about to watch will explain a lot of what they're feeling, a lot of the barriers they're confronting.
Identify as a Hispanic American.
Afro-Latina.
Mexican-American.
Chicana.
Mexican.
Afro-Latino.
To my family, I am Puerto Rican. To the country, I am Latina.
Growing up, I felt as though I was too Black to be Latina and too Latina to be Black.
Chicana, I think, identifies more of the political and social values that I hold, more than just where my family's from.
I don't feel pressure to be more Latino or American. I'm comfortable with who I am, culturally.
How can I be Mexican when I'm pressured to be more American? How can I be American when I'm pressured to be more Mexican?
My family, growing up, wanted me to stick with my Hispanic roots, but also did not want me to show those roots to the world.
A lot of the times people didn't even know that I was Cuban, because I guess I don't look like your typical Cuban.
My mom is Mexican, so I've always grown up with her culture, with her language, while being American doesn't come up as easily.
I've gotten people assume, even other Latinos assume that I'm white or that I'm not Latina or Chicana. It definitely hurts, but at the same time, it's not something that I can control. I think I can do my best to project that identity.
It's hilarious when you walk into a room and they don't think you're Caucasian enough, you're not American enough, you're not Latino enough.
Being Latino isn't as accepted as it should be.
It makes me feel pressured to fit a certain mold here in the United States. But now that I'm older, it's more like, it's what I make of it.
That doesn't stop me from being proud of who I am and where I'm from.
And then ultimately, I think what you settle on is how you view yourself.
We're kind of stripped in a lot of cases of our Spanish tongue and our Spanish heritage and told it's really important that you only speak English.
Because if you're from a Spanish-speaking country and you can't speak Spanish, it's harder for you to connect with the people there.
And not being ashamed when you do speak Spanish, but also not being ashamed if you weren't taught it.
Okay, so Spanish is not my first language because my parents were afraid of me being discriminated against because they were discriminated against. And now they're hurting me because I'm not Latino enough because Spanish is not my first language. But they don't know that I couldn't speak Spanish because my parents were afraid of me getting hurt.
My parents have already done all the work for me. And that's why I feel like I have like a bright future ahead of me because the work's already been done. All I have to do is like harvest what has been put on the ground.
But it's about me and other Afro-Latinos working really hard and continuing to make strides.
I feel like this country has a lot of opportunity for me.
When you have pushed another human being towards the light, towards positivity, towards a voting booth, towards using their power, you are powerful.
People are telling us as Hispanics that we don't belong here. That's kind of motivated us to join together as a Hispanic community and say, we do belong here. And despite what you're saying, I will prove to you why I do belong here.
I love this video because it shares exactly what I see in the community, and I have seen when one of the things that is very important that when I do have my groups and I do have the parents and we start talking about substance abuse, I always integrate the acculturation piece and how they're feeling, their value, that they are important, that they come with values from their countries. And that does not mean that because you live in America, that you have to dismiss those values, that you have to dismiss, you know, what is important to you and what you bring from your country. It's very important also to, when I do meet with them, I usually, and what I've encountered, what the barriers that I see also is that the children begin to learn English, they forget Spanish, and now mom and the child or the youth cannot communicate anymore. So it's very important when I have them together to encourage them to keep the Spanish language in their homes, to know their value, to know that they bring you know, a richness about their country to the United States. So I love this video because it talks, you could see what they're feeling and how to encourage this youth so that they could go forward and reach their dreams.
Thank you, Maritza. That was great. And the video was fantastic. Was noticing in the chat, people were asking for the link. And so Prevention First already put that link in. Thank you. That was a really good way for us to get started. The title of this workshop is Working with Communities of Color, right? So we always talk about knowing your populations. So Alicia, can you talk to us a little bit about the populations that you've worked with and your individual experiences in working in these communities? And this is Alicia Longmire with Prevention First.
Thank you so much, Dr. Don. Yes, I am so happy and honored to be here to present with both you and Maritza on such an important and timely topic. As you said before, this is the time that we can begin having these conversations face to face and not in a closed room where we're not able to share truly what's happening in our country and what's going to be reflected in our community. First of all, I want to tell you, I have been working in the African American community for over the years I've been in prevention. That's been my primary population to work with. It's really important to understand that even though I am a African American woman, I'm a Black woman, doesn't mean I always have answers to the African American Black people's problem and make everybody understand that what Black people are dealing with, I have that same issue. I may not. And that's why it's really important for us to understand, as Maritza's video showed in an excellent manner, the variety of differences that exist within one people of color, the differences within culture that are expressed, the different colors that are expressed there. And you have to understand, not everybody from one population is going to be able to relate on the same level. And so when we're in the African American community, what I've learned primarily is that you have to understand there's a story that exists within that community. There's a story that exists within the culture itself. It may originate within families. It may originate in a society or in a group of people that, for instance, we have a big festival here in Cincinnati called the Midwest Black Family Reunion. It's this huge opportunity to celebrate cultures, and you really are excited to get there and see the differences that exist. There's an African culture that exists in African American. That's where we're from. That's where we originate. So we got to remember that that's still part of us. And so there's an African piece there that has drawn, that African Americans has drawn from for years, even though we have been disconnected from that continent and that the origination of our culture, and has been lost, as Marissa referred to. In a lot of ways, we don't have that roots anymore. But I've learned through my experience that there is a struggle to try to return to that. And part of what I've learned is there's principles, and there's a structure, there's an order that happens with that African-American community. And one of that is respecting our elders. Now, we may always, back in the day when I was growing up, there was a big mom, there was the overall, there was a person or an image that you looked up to that was always considered older when you say elder. But I'm learning through the culture and how we're changing, that's not always the case anymore. There's influencers in our African-American community that exist. They're also considered elders, where I understand now I have to go to them, even as a Black person, to enter into that other culture that exists, because I'm not part of that. So I still have to go and ask for permission. I still have to enter in with humility and with honor and with respect, which leads me to the principles of my principles is a part of African history. It's a part of the Egyptian history, which I've been taught by my mentors for a long time ago. A couple of them were on a call that I see that talked about understanding Egyptian history, and talking about African history, not just African Americans, but the African history behind it and the roots that lie within it. And because of that, I understand the order that exists and why I have to respect elders, why I have to still be humble when it comes to entering to those communities who are less fortunate than myself. I'm not always seen as the person that is trusted. So I still have to go into that same community with the same community I'm from, that I originated from. I still have to go understanding that there's still some lasting effects of trauma, and there's still some lasting effects of racism, as we already know, that has impacted that community, so they don't always trust. That leads me to how the Paco Coalition that I'm still a part of, we were really active in understanding our population and trying to figure out what was all related to drug abuse and use, and how could we tackle that with prevention? How can we handle that? And we found out not everybody was concerned about that. Not everybody wanted to know about that. So when we began to, first of all, we were able to survey and get data, which was a huge success, because what sometimes is implied, African Americans won't give you information there because we don't trust higher institutions. We were able to break some of those barriers using those principles in mind, and be able to find out that we were dealing with trauma. Before trauma was a word we use every day now, we were able to capitalize on it by using the data we got from these kids. And we went to those elders and we spoke to, look at what's going on. This gun violence and all these things that are happening, the kids being taken out of the home, school failure, it's creating a trauma response. How can we do this? How can we change this and promote resiliency? So that's my piece when I talk about understanding your community and knowing where you come from, but also knowing you have to go in with some humility before you get started. So.
Thank you so much, Alicia. Thank you so much. That was great. Marissa, do you want to respond about knowing your population?
Yes, actually, I have a slide, and it's important to note that first of all, the population that I serve, the majority, 80%, is from Guatemala. And so these are, this is the population that is coming in now that need our attention, basically. They are coming with trauma. They are coming with a lot of barriers in their countries, never been to a doctor, never seen a counselor, doesn't know what it means to sign paperwork that indicates that, you know, disclosure forms. I mean, you have to start from zero with them when they come to see me. The population that I serve, like I said, the majority are from Guatemala. And when you look at this, the population in Guatemala, 60% of the population speaks Spanish. So when I see them in my office, many times they do not speak, they speak very little Spanish. They speak a language from their country that comes from the Mayan. So there's the Mam, the Kachi, the Equachi, and the Cacuic languages. So when I am introducing them to prevention, I mean, what is prevention? A lot of times they do not know. I mean, I've seen people in my office that never been to school, and some that been to third grade education only. So when I'm providing that information, I have to make sure, if I want to impact the population that I'm serving, I have to make sure that I need to be flexible. And if they don't understand a word, I have to make sure and ask and say, did you understand what I meant when I said consequences? A lot of times they do not know what consequences is. So how do I break that down? Well, you know, good and bad, something that is good and something that is bad. So sometimes I have to, you know, break down the wording in a way that they will understand it if I'm trying to impact them. And like Alicia said, a lot of them do not trust. They've had bad experiences, so they do not trust. First of all, I would say the majority of my clients, 90%, are undocumented. So why do you want this information? Why do you need me to sign these forms for? Who are you going to provide this information to? So there's so understanding the population that I serve is extremely important to understand where they come from, what was the trauma, how did they get here to the United States, did they see trauma on their journey here? You know, so there's a lot of information and a lot of questions that I need to ask that may not be in the evaluation and may not be in the assessment, but that it is important for me to ask in order for me to provide those tools that they need to recover or to heal. So knowing your population is extremely important, and it is important for them to feel comfortable, to feel an affiliation with you, that you look like them, even though I'm from Puerto Rico, which is totally different. I always say we're different in many ways, but what is important to us is family. And I guess when you begin to talk about the family and how important it is for you to heal in order for your family to heal, or provide information so that then you could provide that same information to your children, to an uncle, to a neighbor, they become more open and feel more comfortable. I always say, I think Alicia also talked about this, knowing their story. You know, what is your story? What brought you here? Who do you have back home? Who did you leave back home? How hard it is for you, you know, how hard it was for you to say goodbye. So there's some things that, like I said, is not in the evaluation or in the paperwork, but that you want to make sure that they're open and feel comfortable to say, wow, this person is interested in my story, and then begin to provide the tools and the information that that person needs. So yes, knowing your population is extremely important.
Thank you so much. I hope you guys in the audience are really taking some notes, because there are some really good nuggets here. You know, when Maritza mentioned, you know, it's not always about what's on the evaluation, right? There are other questions that she realized when family is important, then I'm going to use that, right, as sort of my bridge. So making sure we know and understand the community, right? So the next thing I want to talk a little bit about are engagement strategies. And so Alicia, I was going to ask, can you talk to me a little bit about engagement strategies? Like, is there something that possibly you learn that works in one community but not another? Or are there strategies that seem to be, you know, the same across the board?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Don. I would love to share that. First of all, I've learned so much from being a part of outreach in the community. There was a moment in time where I worked with a group of prevention professionals, and we went out into the community. We actually, and it was different for me because we left the building and we went out into the community. We had a mobile unit van, and it was named Nomad, and it played on the word nomad because it spoke to that we didn't stay on one spot in the community. We moved around, and it stood for no more alcohol and drugs. And that alone was a conversation piece in itself, because we can get people to people come to the table and like, what are you talking about? No more alcohol and drugs. So what I'm saying that I learned a lot with that outreach, and these are the tips that I would have to share. First of all, when you're in a community of any people of any color, whatsoever, everyone wants to be greeted. If I was able to be in person with you, I was probably demonstrating body language, because that's a huge piece of it. When you're in a community and you're having an engagement opportunity, please, you have to situate yourself behind the table and move around to meet them face to face. COVID has made it different, but I'm saying without that, you can move around a little bit. You can open up that door with your body language alone to say hello and wave. Individuals may be intimidated. They may, again, not trust what you're talking about. Some may be really antagonistic or feel that you're coming in their community, you're trying to do something that they don't like. And that does create a barrier. But what you can do is say hello. You can wave. A lot of times I learned the Nomad experience going into the community. You still have to ask for permission to approach sometimes. You still have to understand that there's a distance that is between you, because they don't know you. And they don't want to be looked at as someone that is telling you something they shouldn't have told you. They don't know if you're somebody that's related to law enforcement, which could be, their experience could have been negative at some point. And so so coming to them and asking for permission, and when you're in that face-to-face interaction, before you do anything, you can ask, okay, before you do anything, to touch them, or you have to understand that body language is really important when you're in the community. I've noticed with our engagement techniques, because we're moving back into that, from being home into the space of we're together again, I do notice a lot of people as providers are still afraid to move closer now because of that interaction or that fear that you may contract something. But I still feel that you still can make yourself open with your body language. I see a lot of cell phones, heads down, because that's what we're accustomed to now, because we have made, that's been our new normal. But I know that when you're out in the community, people appreciate eye contact. People appreciate you greeting them when you come to the table and speak to them. But one thing is very important, to have talking points and about current events that's taking place that is impacting everyone. I believe that is very important, and to engage with people you don't know or they don't know you. So I believe you can begin to talk about those issues that are positive. There's might be positive things happening in the community that you both can benefit from, and you're sharing that information. There's a new bike trail. Did you find out there's an opportunity to go exercise? There's a new opportunity to share information about a new movie or something in that will not cause controversy, but just have talking points that's relevant to everyone. I believe that's very positive. And I know that sometimes things can get controversial, so leaning away from politics and things like that. If you feel like you can't go there, don't, because that's a big issue I've seen in our community. When I'm out and doing outreach, I try to stay away from that, but I do try to talk about healthy living. I try to talk about things that impact the family and where to find resources. Just in that in itself, if I see children with a parent and I see them smoking around that chair, that's opportunity to start talking about how to change the behaviors, how to make sure you're keeping your child safe. And just also remembering there's places of house of worship that you can use as opportunity for outreach. And I believe those are fantastic ways to engage the community. And I'll just stop there.
Great, thank you. Maritza, do you have something you'd like to add to around engagement strategies?
Yes. Like I mentioned before, their story is extremely important, right? Understanding their story, having patience in them explaining. They could come in for a DUI, for example, to the office, but I'm also looking at other things, who is in the family? Do the children have Medicaid? Were they born in the United States? If they were born in the United States, then talk about the rights that the children have, that they could apply for Medicaid, who they can call. So not targeting that the immediate reason why they came to the office, but looking beyond, having that 3D vision where you could see really what's going on, not just by word, but how they're acting. Are they nervous? So making them feel comfortable so that I could ask those questions, talk about their rights in the United States, and that their children do have the rights if they are born here in the United States. Is there domestic violence? So there's a lot of things that I make sure that I connect. Another lesson that I've learned is being flexible with my appointments. I make sure that if they're working, because work is important for them, I'm not going to tell them to come in at 11 if I know that they come out at 5 o'clock, for example. So I try to have late hours where I could work till 8 o'clock. So making sure that they have that opportunity to come and clear whatever they need to be cleared, whether it's court or with the lawyer. So texting them. I always text them. I have a cell phone, work cell phone, and I text them, don't forget your appointment is, such and such date. I also put the address there, where my address is. And sometimes I'm on the phone saying, oh, okay, no, where are you? No, you're in Linton. Okay, you're going to make a left. So it's having that connection with them. So I've learned a lot of patience for sure, and being flexible. I've also learned how to be an artist, because if they've never learned how to read or write, how am I going to explain a procedure, or how am I going to explain what strengths are, or do you have a safety net, and how I'm going to present that. So I present it by drawings and things like that. So I've learned a lot how to make sure that my message is coming across so that I could impact the people that I serve. But I also wanted to have you look at working with communities of color, where it says Anglo-American and Latino is totally different. Because if you see, for example, in the Latino, where it says extended family oriented, that is a protective factor. So we know if they're here by themselves and they don't have families and they left the family back home, then we know that protective factor is not there. So how am I going to ensure that that person is connecting with people that are similar, that speak their language, whether it's an AA group in Spanish, whether it's a house of worship. So all of those things are important to connect them with, so that they could have that factor. Importance in spirituality. A lot of times they come to the office and they ask, they have a strong belief in God. And so how am I going to work around that? Am I going to eliminate that and say, well, no. So I bring that in. How important is that for you? And how do you want to have that in your treatment? If you want that in your treatment, is that important? That we're going to do our best to add that. So there's a lot of things that are totally different from the Anglo-American to the Latino culture, as you can see there. So having that in mind is very important, because that's how you're going to present your services to the community that you serve.
Thank you so much. I love the chart. That's really helpful. And as both of the speakers said, right, like, just because you meet one community doesn't mean everybody's going to be just like this thing, or everybody's going to be. So as you take in all of this information, remember, right, it's not a Bible sort of to remember by. These are things to keep in mind, to think about as you're working with other communities. So I know that in Ohio, we've spent a significant time learning and talking and getting training on the Strategic Prevention Framework, right, the SPIF. So I know I've spent 10 years of my career working on it. And so one of the things about the SPIF is the second phase talks about capacity building, right? And readiness as a significant part of capacity. Alicia, can you talk to us specifically? I know you've represented the SPIF locally at your community and been a part of some other projects. Can you talk to us about community readiness and the value of that when you're thinking about providing services?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Don. Yes, the SPIF has been as part of our our language for some years now, right? So with the SPIF came out of the need for people like us in prevention that really needed a framework to help plan around implementation really. A lot of times I feel before I understood SPIF, which is Strategic Prevention Framework that came out of SAMHSA, I really thought implementation was the key. I really thought jump in there and just get it done because I know what the community needs and I know but not really understanding that is the community ready? Okay, is the community able to take this project that you created for them and implement it, and can it last? Will it sustain itself? So what I really wanted to share with you is just some discussion, and also hopefully it piques some interest and some thought around readiness and community readiness and why it's really important, and also share research with you a little later. So when you're talking about the SPIF, there's different levels. As you see, this is SPIF flower, and it's guided by two principles of sustainability and cultural competence, which is exactly what we're talking about when we're discussing working with communities of color. The second level, which is capacity, and you understand this does not stop just because we move to level 2. Capacity continues. You have to assess that continually through the process of change when the community changes. So capacity highlights two important pieces, which is resource and readiness. And readiness has several levels. As you all may know, resources include many different things. It can be financial or fiscal resource. It can be agency, it can be organizational. It also can be human resources. So we always looking when we're talking about resources at the assets in the community, not so much any gaps or deficiencies or deficits. So, but with readiness, that's a different thing. It has to go together. You may have all the resources, but you also have to see that there's a level of readiness in it, and it may not be, your community may not be able to take on just because they have the resources, the ability to facilitate a project program, or even a new way of thinking about a problem behavior. So I wanted to just share with you, there is different levels of community readiness. It's based off a community readiness model, and it has 9 stages, okay? It's pretty significant just to think that there's 9 stages when you're trying to learn about community readiness. This all came out of the need to improve prevention years ago, along the lines of, we have a prevention program, but we don't see it making any difference. So how can we come up with the opportunity? How can we come up with a model that will help change? And then how do we help communities do the same that we have, what we're seeing in the community that implemented this in the first phases of this community readiness model? This came actually out of Colorado State, where there was a need to look at the Mexican American, the Alaskan American, those projects that were happening in the communities of those community colors was not being really effective. So they were like, how can we fix this and change this problem that we're seeing? And we're putting money in it, but it's nothing happening. African American communities have been victims of this over and over again. If you think about the gentrification, the urban renewal that's taking place most of here in Cincinnati, where I live, there's a huge amount of that taking place. The community environment is changing, surroundings, but it's not really considering the residents. So what happens when that all is done? Are those same residents welcome to stay in that new type of community? And all the time, this creates a frustration of inequality. There's a failure of the project, is not sustaining because the community members were not ready and the leadership was not considered. Okay, so this model came out of the Tri-Ethnic Center for Prevention Research, and this is community readiness model that you can follow. And I'm not saying, like Dr. Don says, not the Bible, but it is a model that was developed in 1995 that really considered all these issues that were taking place. It has been updated and has evolved over the years, and now their latest, you can see, is in 2014. That link will take you there, and that has been allowed. We have been able to learn from those who did have this issue before, the Mexican American, American Indian, who were not able to push forward projects because of the lack of support in the community, and those in the community not being considered. So I just wanted to share that information with you so you can see how you can get out here and have the capacity. You can figure out the readiness, and you can move your community forward. I know there is a piece I want to share with you real quick, just one more minute. There is a group I'm a part of, as well as Prevention First. We're part of a African-American engagement work group. And that work group was established by a treatment committee here in Hamilton County. And it was part of as a small part of a coalition response to opioid crisis, okay? In 2017, AEW came together and said, you know what, there's some issues going on in the African community, and we're not really paying attention to it. We need to get on board. That was in 2017. I can tell you the community wasn't ready to hear that African Americans were using opioids. They were not ready to hear that African Americans were mixing this with their drug of choice, because we were told by media for a long time that there was never an issue with that, because that's what white Americans do. Black people don't do that. But now, here it is, right now, our community is finally starting to see, because we're finally ready. We moved from no awareness to feel and denial to being a little more aware that we are now being impacted by the overdose and the overdose deaths and opioid crisis. And now, unfortunately, one of our communities, Walnut Hills in particular, is the #1 community in the state of Ohio with the overdose death rate among African Americans. So when I say that, and you're looking at stages of readiness, that happened years ago, 2017 or 2021. We're finally able, and we didn't even make it to number 9, like stage 9. We still in vague awareness. We're not even at community ownership yet. So it takes time, and this model will help you understand it and give you, so hopefully help you understand it takes patience, like Marissa said, and it takes steadfastness, and it really takes love for your community to stay in it this long so we can see change. So thank you for that. I just wanted to make sure I get that information in there.
Thank you, Alicia. So I just want to say, I know everybody knows that I'm like the spiff horn around the state of Ohio. I promise you, when we started doing this presentation, it wasn't even my idea to bring up the spiff. Like literally, Alicia was like, I want to talk about readiness, which I thought was great, because she has a whole different experience, right? And not just from, maybe me talking about these are the stages. She can really take that research to practice, and that's what we want. So I promise y'all that the spiff was not my idea, it was Alicia's. So, but thank you so much for that, because I think we all have a tendency to want to jump right in, right? We want to attack the issue, right? Because you got a grant or something that says you got to do it. But just like Alicia and Maritza says, it takes time and patience. So now I want to ask Maritza this question. Now that we've discussed some strategies that have worked, let's talk about some of the challenges and barriers that you've encountered. Maritza, can you talk to us a little bit about some of the challenges and barriers that you've had or that you've come across when working with communities of color?
Of course. For example, the language, as we know, as I indicated, most of them, Spanish becomes their second language, and their Mayan language becomes their first. So not only that, they don't speak English as well. So language becomes a very, very big barrier when they go to the hospital or they seek help or try to navigate the system. Transportation is another big one, because they don't understand the process of taking a bus. Where is it going to drop me off? What street it is? So they don't know the dynamics of how to get around. So it's providing that information for them. So transportation, understanding the system, the laws here in the United States. You cannot drive with an open flask. You can't drink, underage drinking. These laws are very new to them. So it's letting them understand that these are the laws, but these are also your rights. There is, for example, you could go to the hospital. There is financial assistance application there. They could provide you with that. So it's informing them that does not mean, because you're undocumented, that you can't go see a doctor or you can't have a doctor. The lack of services and referrals. like I said, 90% or even more of the clients that I see are undocumented. So referring them to different services is very important, to know what are the services that they could go to, who are the doctors they could see, who are the counselors that they could go see, regardless if they have documentation or not. So referrals is very important, and to ask them, a lot of people say, well, I shouldn't ask, if they're undocumented or not, because that's really not important. However, the way I ask is I usually explain why I'm asking. So if I say, do you have a social security number? If they say they do not have a social security number, I usually say, okay, and the reason why I'm asking is this: we're going to serve you regardless. It's just that I need to know exactly, if you do, because if you do, there's other services, but you do have services. It's just I need to know where we're going, what are the referrals, where I'm going to send you. So it's letting them understand I'm asking, because I don't want them to sign an application if I know that that application is going to be rejected because they don't have a social security number. So I'm making them go through a whole process, and it's going to reject it. So these are things that it's okay to ask. But when you ask, then you explain why you're asking. The bad experience with certain providers. I mean, I have had clients explain that they've had bad experience even with interpreters, that the interpreters go with them. They know a neighbor. So now the neighbor knows their story when they went to the doctor because they had, a particular sickness. So these are experiences that they have experience, and a lot of times that puts a barrier for them to even share with me what's going on in their lives. So it's making them at ease, but that becomes a really big barrier. A lack of support, like I indicated, no family. They have children, but who's going to take care of my child? My grandparents are back home in Guatemala, so there's not a network of family support. So that becomes a very big barrier. Like I said, the undocumented and their status in the United States, employment, and of course, a very high alcohol use and domestic violence. I hate to say it, but domestic violence, very big because of that alcohol use. So when they come here, like I said, in my office, a lot of times I do consultations. They call me for one thing, but I usually say, well, let's meet face to face, and I bring them in as a consultation so that I could see exactly what's going on and how I could do the proper referrals. So a lot of alcohol use and domestic violence, and how we're going to work those things through is very important, which is one of the reasons why I tell them to come to the office and see what those barriers are.
Thank you so much, Marissa. I think that's really important. I like the way that you helped to sort of rephrase the question, right? Like you just didn't ask, are you undocumented, right? You kind of ask, no, what is your social security number? The reason why I'm asking is this, right? Because instead of going this way, then their level of services might be this way. So I think those are good. Can you share with us, Alicia, really quickly as well? What are some of the barriers and challenges that you've experienced as well? Next slide, please.
Yes, Dr. Don, I can say that some of these may be similar to what Marissa has shared, especially related to distrust of the healthcare system. And that leads to those traumatic experiences, and also opportunities where social services, where they're supposed to help, but then actually cause harm. And even some things related to implicit bias, our own bias as a provider, believe should be considered, because a lot of times we create that barrier without knowing that. I just want to say really quick, when you see that this is trust in the healthcare system, we got to understand that's just going to be there. We can't take it personal. Why do I say this? Because there's a number of reasons why there's a distrust there, and it's going to last and it's going to be part of history. And we just have to acknowledge that. And sometimes not understood in the African-American community about distrust. And shouldn't you get over that because that happened years ago? Well, history, as you said, Dr. Don, speaks to that. It talks about what happened, and then how can we not let it happen again? Okay, and then understanding why those of a certain culture have a certain attitude towards us. We can look at the haircut sister, just a quick timeline of that happened. This is a Tuskegee syphilis study that was in 1881. And then after that, Henrietta Lacks story in 1951 with Johns Hopkins. And then most recently, almost forgotten, the Flint, Michigan water crisis. And we wonder sometimes, why in the world we can't get Black people to come to the table and talk about this? Why won't they let us into their homes and share? Well, would you, if this was part of your history, and it's part of all our history, but this, who was most impacted? So those experiences are connected, are part of a crisis, and then we have to live through that and try to overcome it with no true honest resolution to it and no real acknowledgement that then led to this traumatic impact. And it's impacting not only one person, but a community and families. And we have to work through that alone sometimes. So when we see that gap, that's for us to understand that we have to represent something different for that community. We have to say that we understand this was traumatic. I'm from a support system that is not going to cause you harm. I do have my own biases, but you know what? I acknowledge that, and I'm going to make sure that I do my best that it doesn't impact my decision how to help you. And that's really briefly kind of, if I could ever share that with anybody, that's my own way of being and just having self-reflection when I think about that, and have patience and not be too pushy, but just kind of fall back and let them tell the story, and then understand the apprehension without judgment. So thank you, Dr.
Wow, that was great. Understand the apprehension without judgment. I think that in the last year and a half, I hope I've seen a shift, right, in the kind of information that we've been very vocal about in terms of historical trauma, right? Not only in the African-American community, but in our Native American and American Indian brothers and sisters, and on a lot of other communities, right? Saying the word historical trauma, historical trauma, historical trauma, right? This isn't something that was made up. People's land were stolen, right? And there were things that were done in history to people, and it's not for them to get over, right? But it's for you to, first of all, know it. So that's on us as providers and taking care of people and helping folks to learn that. That's part of our professional responsibility, to learn it, to try to understand it, and to just try and make sure that we, like you said, you may come from a whole culture that's like, get over it, right? But when you use that spirit of cultural humility that we talked about earlier with the slide, it's a different approach, right? You may not ever understand it completely, but you try to make sure that you know it, and that you also admit it, right? That you say it did happen, because that validation is really important. So thank you so much for sharing that. We have about 2 more questions, and we do want to get to some questions at the end. So I'm going to ask Maritza to start off by talking to us about what are some of the most valuable lessons that you've learned from your work, right? So I'm going to give you each about 2 to 3 minutes to answer that question. But I want to start with you, Maritza. What are some of the most valuable lessons that you've learned about your work?
Yeah, I think I mentioned a little bit about that earlier. But like I said, their story is important, that patience on understanding and letting them speak and talk about what they're going through, what they're feeling without rushing. And I know it's hard because sometimes we just have 1 hour for an assessment and an evaluation, and we need to get through that quick. But if it could be done in 2 sessions, without rushing, that would be great. However, maybe, for me as a Latino and bilingual counselor, I advocate for more time, because I know the importance for me to stay longer with my clients to identify what their issues are. So a valuable lesson is that I need to be patient, and I need to advocate for my clients and ask for more time if that needs to take place. Letting them know that that I do care, that it is important to provide the tools that they need. Identify their strengths is very important, and work on those strengths. So if family, for example, like I mentioned, is important, then I'm going to try to make sure that I I bring that strength out, that family is important, and because family is important, let's make sure that we get this, for the courts, or let's make sure that we do this particular assessment quickly so that you could, be home with your family, or you could, so making sure that I'm picking up on the words that they're saying, so that I could use that as a strength and to go forward. The culture piece is important, understanding that the population. So a lot of the things that I have mentioned, like flexibility, being flexible with my appointments, texting them as a reminder. Some places you go to, for example, some systems are not, how do I say this? They're not designed for the population that I see. So for example, some people could say, well, in 2, appointments or 3, if you do not come, you're canceled. I do not do that. I try my best to make sure that they do come. If they don't come, then I'll say, then what works? So those are, best practices, is ensuring that I'm flexible about their time, and that their time is important. Being personable, sometimes, like I think Alicia said, going, around my table and sitting right beside them, and telling them, that it's okay, that they can share, that everything is confidential, because they don't know their rights, or they never been to a counselor or to a doctor in their country. They really don't understand what confidentiality is and how important it is, here in the United States. So it's allowing them to see, if I'm writing, for example, something, I make sure that I'm saying I'm writing this so that I won't forget, so that I could make sure that this is important to you, so it is important to me. So a lot of times they see you writing, they don't know if you're going to give that to the probation officer. Okay, what are you going to do with that information? So it's allowing them to see and to understand the process, all the process. Those are some of the lessons that I've learned.
Great, thank you so much. Alicia, can you talk to us about a few of the lessons we learned? So we're nearing the end here, but I really want to ask this last question, and then we know we might only have a few minutes left for questions, but we do want to take them. So I want to find out from Alicia, what are her valuable lessons learned? And then we'll go into our last question.
Thank you, Dr. Don. Yes, really quickly, I just want to share what's on a slide, just understanding when you engage with people of color, and that's with really anybody. We're talking about just humans. When you're engaging with people, just understand there's a concept of empathy, and it's not for you to feel sad or grieve with them, but it's understanding that what if you were in that space with them? What would that be like? And if there's something that you can identify with them, please do that. That is what is you're being relatable. And in this field, you have to be that. I really feel that's how you can be effective, when people can understand, like, I can relate to her. She can relate to me. She understands me. She gets me. She understands. She may not be where I'm at, but she's not judging me either. And if you can't help that person, and in prevention, I have to say this, I'm a preventionist. I can't deal with those in treatment in the way that maybe Marissa can, but I know Marissa. I know that she's a part of my family and this whole piece with preventing addiction. So I would be able to have a resource for them. Don't let them walk away, okay, without having a resource. It's something in their hand they can get with someone. And you're making sure you're part of that group of people that are part of helping, and making sure you're getting out of your own silo and the echo chamber. We'll talk about that a little later, but that was part of my next response, is making sure we're connected with those who can help you with the problem that you can't help somebody else with. Understanding a lot of us, the struggle is real, and we just got to from our own perspective, realizing we have our own struggles as well as the others we're dealing with, and being relatable and humble enough to say, I understand where you're at, and it helps change your perception of how you approach and how you work with others as well. When you can say, this is something if I was going through, I would want this for me, and treat them as that.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you so much. I like that you said that, hey, my background is prevention. I don't know treatment, but Maritza's in my family. So I'm gonna, you're right, like so that you have somebody. Thank you about those valuable lessons learned. I'm gonna kick it off with you, Alicia, on this last question, and then we're gonna go to Maritza. So a lot of times when we go to workshops like this, right, a lot of times we do feel overwhelmed, right? Here I go talking about 3 landmark reports, oh, make sure you take a look at those. And then everyone's talking about all these different things, right? So sometimes it's like overwhelming. Where do I start? Where do I start? So we want to do the right thing. We have good intentions, but it can seem overwhelming. So where can people start? What are 1 to 2 things that people can start? I'm sorry, I said I was going to start with Alicia, but I'm going to start with Maritza this time. Where do I start, Maritza?
Sorry. It's okay to ask questions. I mean, when we don't understand something or they say a word that I don't understand, because like I said, Spanish becomes their second language. So a lot of times I don't understand and I say, well, could you explain that? So it's okay to ask questions. If you want to get to know, for example, the Hispanic Latino culture, there's a lot of festivals that are available. If you don't speak the language, you could always smile. So smile is, you don't need words, with a smile. You could volunteer at different places. There's Su Casa, Santa Maria. So there's places that you can go to understand a little bit better the culture. We also have every Tuesday, actually today is going on, and at Community Action Agency from 2 to 3:30, and that's every the 4th Tuesday of each month. And it's the Hispanic Latino Coalition, where people gather from, from legal aid, just different agencies. And the reason why that's important, at least for me to attend, is because that's where I find resources for the community that I serve. So I'm always asking, do you serve, someone that doesn't have Social Security number? If they say yes, will you see me jotting down the name and information? So that's an extra referral source that I have. So going to different coalitions is important, and shadow a coworker. You could shadow someone that is working with the Hispanic Latino community and see how they're doing. At Santa Maria, I did a women's support group, and what we did there, there's a community garden in Price Hill where they have a plot where they could have, cilantro, tomatoes, corn, just a whole bunch of produce. And what we did 5 sessions, and we talked about acculturation, we talked about trauma, domestic violence, tools to empower the women. And also the 5th one was how to get resources if you have depression, or what doctors you could see. And it was great because we did it in a way where I was helping, to pick the tomatoes and talking at the same time and identifying what were their struggles and making sure I was doing the referrals. So it was a great time to be with the community and to, like I said, know the community. We could be behind our desks and indoors and not know really what the community, looks like and what the community needs. So I always love to work with the grassroots. I like to, roll up my sleeves and work with the community. So this was a great opportunity for me. I've learned a lot from them. So yeah, so it was a support group in Price Hill.
Thank you so much. I noticed one of the people in the chat mentioned that that this church was actually like a cultural institution, and it brings in all kinds of different people. So that was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Alicia, I would like to let you have the last word on the last question. Where do I start, Alicia?
Thank you for asking. I would like to say, if I could do it all over again, and as a provider, prevention is specifically I'm talking about. So when I'm saying get out of silos on my slide, I'm talking about getting into circles that we're not normally in, okay? Getting into spaces that we may not be invited to, but you get a seat at the table anyway, because that's how we know how to do it in prevention. So there's times where I may not be invited to the table to talk about something related to the opioid crisis because I'm into prevention. But I know that if I could do something different, if I could go to the AEW table years ago and sat with and been in that space to discuss, let's talk about the entire healthcare continuum. Let's not just talk about the prevention overdose deaths. Let's talk about prevention of not using, period. So we can get into that conversation and help change the perspective of others where we're not just band-aiding it, we're preventing it, we're not reacting, we're being proactive. If I could just say that the last few minutes, if you are part of a community that has NAACP, Urban League, a chamber of commerce that's focused on a community of color, please be part of that. That is a key piece in how to bond with communities. A lot of times that's being ignored by people, by major institutions or major groups until it's more relevant, till it looks like it should be part, you should be part of it because it's the thing to do. But be a part of that, be the leader and get into spaces like this so that you can be a part of the change when it comes to revitalizing our communities, because a lot of times that's driven by these being a member. We need to have allies, and I just speak to that. I know it's already at 4 o'clock. It went really fast, but I want to make sure if I could say that. And if anybody has any other questions, you can definitely ask and hit us up later with our contact information if you wanted more information about Cincinnati's.
My friends, you are fantastic. I wish we had 12 hours. Every day we need to hear from each of your voices. Thank you so much. I have to shut it down because we have to start up the next one. But here's what I want to say. We have some really wonderful questions that were dropped in the question box and the chat box. What I'm going to do is I'm going to type those questions up. I'm going to email it to our 3 experts. They're going to answer it, and then I'll pull the whole email for everybody who's here, and I'll send those answers back to you guys. I promise you I'll download the chat. We will answer your questions. I am so sorry we're out of time. Can we give folks thank you, a million thank yous, hugs, snaps, claps. Thank you guys. Thank you guys. Folks, please do the survey. I dropped it in the chat. I'll drop it again. Yes, these 3 are amazing, amazing, amazing. I'm going to have to shut it down, guys. So please open up that link so you can do your survey ASAP. And like I said, I will get these questions. I'll get their answers to those questions and I'll email them out to you. I cannot thank you 3 enough. Thank you for being the fantastic people that you are. Thank you. Thank you.